Welcome to Tochi Stories. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on post notification because it will mean the whole world to me. Now let's get right into the story. Brace yourself. Amaka stood before the altar in a cream lace gown, her hands trembling gently as the priest blessed their union. Her parents sat stiffly in the front pew, their smiles hollow and forced. Her mother's eyes had been red since dawn, and her father hadn't said more than 5 words since the morning introduction. Amaka saw the signs. She felt their hesitations. But love is often blind, and pride even blinder. Uche stood beside her, handsome in his well-fitted wine-colored igbada, smiling as though the world already belonged to him. He had convinced her that their love was the kind of bond that defied odds. He told her her parents were too traditional, too rigid, and afraid of her happiness. "They don't understand me like you do," he would whisper in her ears. And she believed him. She believed the man who kissed her forehead every night and spoke of a future filled with laughter and business dreams. So when they exchanged vows, Amaka pushed aside every warning, every uneasy dream, and every silent tear her mother cried during the engagement. The change was slow, so slow she almost didn't notice it at first. At home, Uche became different. Not outwardly abusive, just distant. He stopped praying with her, stopped checking in. Conversations were short, mostly commands. Warm the food. Turn off the generator. Why didn't you sweep today? It wasn't the words that hurt, it was the tone. Sharp cold, and coated with silent irritation. She told herself it was stress from his new shop. She cooked his favorites, massaged his feet when he returned, and even stopped wearing makeup because he once said, "Are you trying to impress someone outside?" One night, he didn't come home until 2 a.m. She had stayed up worried. When he walked in and she asked where he had been, his response cut through her, "I don't owe you explanations." That was the first time Amaka's heart sank in a way that prayer couldn't lift. The Uche she married was slipping, replaced by a man whose silence felt louder than his footsteps. A month later, he scolded her in front of their gate man. It was something minor. She had forgotten to buy salt. "Are you this stupid?" he snapped. "Is this how your mother raised you?" The words hit her harder than any slap ever could. The gate man stood in awkward silence, unsure whether to walk away or apologize on her behalf. Amaka laughed it off, brushing it away like dust. But that night, she sat on the toilet seat and cried into her hands for nearly an hour. She began to question everything, her decision, her love, her worth. She thought marriage would be a covering. Instead, it had become a silent war. The house she entered with joy now echoed with things left unsaid, with cold dinners and colder glances. She prayed. Oh, she prayed. But prayers, she would soon learn, don't change a man who has never seen anything wrong with the way he walks over someone else's soul. The man who kissed her forehead at their wedding was now a ghost in their home, present in body, but absent in heart. Uche barely spoke to Amaka anymore unless it was to give instructions or bark complaints. "Where's my towel? You ironed my shirt wrong. Why does the house smell like Maggie?" His voice was always tinged with annoyance, as though her very existence irritated him. If Amaka wore a fitted dress, he would say, "Who are you trying to seduce today?" If she served food a few minutes late, he'd throw the plate to the side, shouting that she was lazy and ungrateful. But what broke her wasn't the private cruelty. It was how he acted in public. To outsiders, Uche was a sweet, soft-spoken man. He would smile at church, quote Bible verses during family functions, and call Amaka "my jewel" in front of others. Everyone praised him. "You're lucky, Amaka," they'd say. "Uche is a real man." But at home, he didn't even remember to ask if she had eaten. The accusations began subtly. If her phone rang and she smiled, he would ask, "Who was that? You're laughing too much these days." If she went to the market and took too long, he would demand receipts and question where the rest of the money went. He even accused her of flirting with their neighbor because she greeted him with a smile. "I know your type," Uche spat one evening. "Women like you pretend to be innocent, but you're worse than the ones on the street." Amaka stood there stunned, clutching the basin of water she had just used to wash his clothes. "What did I do wrong?" she asked, her voice cracking. "You exist," he muttered. "That's enough." That was the night Amaka wrote the first line in her secret diary. I am married to a man who thinks my smile is a crime. The walls of their apartment were silent witnesses to the slow killing of her identity. The woman who once danced to Ace's music in the kitchen now tiptoed around her own home like a stranger. One evening, Uche came home unusually early. Amaka was in the kitchen, humming softly as she stirred soup. He walked in, grabbed her by the arm, and asked, "Who taught you to dance like that?" "Men, right? The ones you entertain while I'm out suffering." She froze. "It's just a song," she whispered. But it didn't matter. He shoved her aside, knocking the pot off the stove. "You're embarrassing me. You don't even act like a married woman. Always trying to seduce someone." Amaka looked up at him, shocked. She was wearing a baggy blouse and wrapper. There was nothing seductive about her. But Uche didn't need evidence. He only needed a reason to unleash his fury. That night, as she cleaned the spilled soup and wiped her tears, she realized something chilling. Uche hated her joy. He hated her laughter. And worst of all, he was beginning to enjoy watching her fade. Amaka's family had been distant since the wedding, but things became worse after Uche's constant lies. He accused her of poisoning his food, claimed her mother was the one whispering evil into her ears. He told anyone who would listen that he was surrounded by witches disguised as women. The first time he said it in front of her parents, Amaka was too stunned to speak. It was at her father's birthday. Uche stood and raised a glass, smiling. But instead of toast, he said, "I thank my in-laws for giving me a wife who spends more time beautifying herself than learning how to cook. Maybe it runs in the family. Women here care more about charm than virtue." The silence in the room was thick. Her mother blinked in disbelief. Her father's lips tightened. Amaka forced a laugh and whispered, "He's joking." But she knew he wasn't. That night, her father told her quietly, "You need to call us when he insults you like this." But the next time she did, he changed his tone. "Just endure. You're married now." The final blow came when her younger brother Chijioke came visiting. Uche, drunk on palm wine, accused Chijioke of secretly lusting after his own sister's wife. Chijioke, shocked and furious, stood up to defend himself. But Uche shoved him. Amaka tried to intervene, but Uche slapped her so hard that she hit the chair and fell. "You see? Even in front of your family, you still disrespect me," he shouted. Her mother cried that day, holding her daughter and begging her to be patient. "You can't keep disgracing us by running home. People will talk." Amaka nodded quietly, but in her heart she broke. She realized that no one was coming to rescue her. Not her father, not her mother, not her siblings. They had all chosen family honor over her safety. And with each slap, each insult, each accusation, she knew she was utterly alone. Uche capitalized on this isolation. "Your family has failed," he often told her. "That's why you're clinging to me like a stray dog." He started banning her from visiting her parents. "You're not going to that house. They've infected your mind enough," he declared. When her mother fell ill, Amaka begged for permission to go. But Uche locked the gate and hid the keys. "Let the witch die," he said without remorse. Amaka sat by the window and wept. Her neighbors heard but did nothing. They had seen enough. And in their silence, Uche's pride grew. That was when Amaka wrote again in her diary, "It's not the beating that hurts the most. It's that everyone I thought would protect me told me to endure it." The girl who once ran barefoot into her mother's arms was now locked inside a cage built from shame and silence. It began like every other evening. The stale silence, the burnt stench of Uche's anger floating through the house, and Amaka quietly folding his laundry on the edge of the bed, pretending not to exist. But this evening would not end like the others. Uche had returned home earlier than expected and met Amaka outside the compound, laughing with the landlord's daughter as she helped carry groceries inside. He stood at a distance, watching, his eyes burning. She hadn't noticed him at first, not until he marched past them without a word. Inside the house, he dropped his bag, locked the front door with force, and called out her name with venom. "Amaka." She rushed in, her heart already trembling. He didn't ask questions. He threw accusations. So now you entertain men in my absence? You flirt with the landlord? Are you that desperate? Amaka was stunned. It was his daughter, Uche. I was helping her carry, but the backhand came swiftly, cutting her sentence mid-air. She fell. Again. Hard. She sat there, holding her face, not because of the pain, but because of the shame. You're nothing but a decorated slut, he spat, pacing like a madman. You think you can bring disgrace to my name? I'll break every bone in your body if I have to. She crawled to the bed, trying to create space between them, but he followed. Grabbing her wrapper, he yanked it off and kicked her in the ribs. Stand up. Seductress. Let's see the body you used to tempt men. Amaka screamed. Her voice echoed through the compound, but no one came. Not anymore. They had all learned to pretend not to hear. He grabbed her diary and flung it at her, pages flying like broken wings. Writing your love letters to your secret men? He asked, picking up a shoe and aiming it at her back. Uche, please, she sobbed, shielding herself. Her pleas only made him angrier. Don't beg now, Amaka. You weren't begging when you were smiling with other men. When he finally stopped, Amaka could barely move. Her lip was bleeding, her back was bruised, and her soul felt as though it had been dragged across broken glass. She lay curled in a corner, unable to cry anymore. The house was a graveyard, and she was the only ghost left inside. Uche went to the bedroom, slammed the door, and turned on the TV, watching football as though nothing had happened. Amaka stayed on the floor until dawn. She didn't sleep. She didn't pray. She just stared at the ceiling and wondered how she had gone from bride to punching bag in less than 2 years. She didn't want to die, but she no longer wanted to live either. Not like this. Her silence that night wasn't surrender. It was the start of a quiet decision. If she didn't leave soon, her blood would be the next thing he'd wash off his hands like dirty dishes. The first time Amaka saw the text, she blinked 3 times to be sure. Uche had forgotten his phone on the center table, and while cleaning, it lit up with a message that read, "Can't wait to taste you again tonight. Last time was fire." Amaka froze. Her heart sank. Her hands shook as she scrolled through the chat thread. There were pictures, hotel receipts, voice notes, explicit messages that made her stomach twist. But the most painful part was the date. He had told her he was fasting for breakthrough that day. The betrayal was not just in the body, it was in the soul. She dropped the phone gently, afraid of what would happen if he returned to find her with it. That night, she didn't confront him. She cooked his food, knelt to serve it, and even smiled when he asked for water. But inside her, something had cracked permanently. She was no longer in denial. The monster wore no mask anymore. Eventually, she did confront him, 3 days later, when she had memorized the number and even called it using a borrowed phone. The woman confirmed the affair and even laughed when Amaka warned her to stay away from her husband. "Control your man," the woman mocked. When Amaka brought it up to Uche, she didn't shout. She asked softly, "Are you cheating?" He raised his eyes from the newspaper slowly. "What kind of stupid question is that?" She repeated, "Are you cheating, Uche?" And that was it. The moment he stood, flung the newspaper, and charged at her. "How dare you?" he shouted. "You sneak around, smiling at men, seducing neighbors, and now you accuse me?" She tried to stand her ground. "I've seen the messages, Uche. There are pictures. There's proof." He laughed cruelly. "Those messages are fake, created by demons like you to scatter marriages." Then he grabbed her neck and pinned her to the wall. "Next time you accuse me again, I will make sure your parents bury you." Amaka gasped for air, and he finally released her. She collapsed to the floor, coughing. He adjusted his shirt, picked up his keys, and left the house, slamming the door behind him. That evening, when he returned, he didn't say a word. He ate his food, watched TV, and asked if she had ironed his clothes. She nodded in silence. The next morning, he even tried to initiate sex like nothing had happened. Amaka stared at the ceiling the whole time, her soul disconnected from her body. The man who beat her, cheated on her, and called her cursed, had now reduced her to a vessel. Empty, voiceless, numb. And worse, he still believed he was righteous. He would walk into church, lift his hands in worship, and shout Amen louder than anyone else. But at home, he was a demon in trousers, feeding off the light he'd extinguished in his wife's eyes. Amaka no longer prayed for his change. She began praying for strength, strength to survive, strength to escape. It was a hot Saturday afternoon when the humiliation exploded into the open. Amaka had been sweeping the compound while Uche sat shirtless outside, drinking palm wine with 3 of his friends. She tried to walk past them respectfully, but one of the friends made a joke. "Madam, no smile today? Abioga, no give you transport money." They all laughed. Uche didn't. He stood up and threw his cup to the ground. "So now you're entertaining my friends too, eh?" Laughing like a prostitute. Amaka froze. "I didn't say anything," she replied softly. But Uche was already walking toward her. "I said, are you not ashamed? Flaunting yourself like market fish." Then, in front of everyone, he grabbed her wrapper and yanked it. The cloth tore. Her blouse shifted. Her chest partially exposed. The entire compound watched. Children screamed. Women gasped. But no one moved. She tried to cover herself with her arms, trembling, mortified. "Uche, please," she whispered. But he kept shouting. "She's a shameless whore. I caught her smiling at the landlord last week. She has been sleeping with him. Tell them. Confess." The neighbors stood like statues. Some pulled out phones to record. Others whispered, "This man don't start again." Amaka finally found her voice. "You're lying," she said through tears. "You cheat on me. You beat me. You do worse." But Uche slapped her so hard she fell to the ground. "Shut up. Liar. Don't turn this on me." She crawled back toward the house, one arm covering her chest, the other shielding her face. Her dignity had been ripped to pieces, not just her wrapper, not just her pride, but her soul. Uche turned to the crowd and shouted, "Let the world know what I married. Let them see the truth." That night, Amaka sat on the floor of their bathroom, wearing only a towel, shaking violently. She could still hear the laughter, the phones clicking, the judgment in the eyes of people she used to greet with respect. She didn't cry. Not this time. Her tears had run dry. She stared at herself in the mirror, the bruises blooming like poisoned flowers on her skin. And in that moment, she saw what Uche had turned her into, a woman afraid of her own reflection. That night, as Uche snored in their bedroom like nothing had happened, Amaka opened her diary and wrote, "Today, I died in front of the world, and no one saved me. But if I survive this night, I will never let it happen again." It started with an argument over 2,000 Nigerian nairas. Just 2 crumpled notes that Amaka requested so she could buy pepper, oil, and other small items to prepare soup. Uche had come home late again, smelling like cigarette smoke and cheap perfume, his shirt stained, his eyes bloodshot. She waited until he finished removing his shoes before speaking carefully, respectfully, the way she had been conditioned to speak over time. "Uche, please," she said gently. "We're out of foodstuff. I need to go to the market tomorrow morning." Uche scoffed and took a long, dramatic sip from the cup in his hand. "So I'm now your father?" he asked. "You don't know how to manage the little I give you? You want to kill me with expenses." Amaka stood there, heart pounding, fingers twisting the edge of her wrapper. "It's just for tomatoes and palm oil," she whispered. But that whisper was enough to light the fire. He stood abruptly, knocking over the stool beside him, his temper exploding like hot oil. Uche lunged toward her, grabbing her by the throat and pushing her against the wall. "You want to disgrace me in this house? You think I don't know what you're doing with my money? Giving it to your lovers, right? So they can keep enjoying your dirty body." Amaka tried to speak, to deny the accusation, but he slapped her so hard that her head slammed against the doorframe. She collapsed, her vision blurred, and before she could move, he kicked her in the side. "Slut," he barked. "Shameless disgrace of a woman. I should have left you in your father's house." Blood began to trickle from her temple. She didn't even feel it at first. She only noticed when it started dripping onto the tiles, forming small red circles that seemed to mock her. Uche looked at her, breathing heavily, his chest rising and falling with rage, and then walked away like nothing had happened. He didn't offer help, didn't flinch, didn't speak. He simply stepped over her and entered the bedroom. Amaka lay there, dazed, her fingers gently touching her bleeding scalp, wondering if she had finally reached the end. But still, something in her refused to die. Slowly, she crawled toward the bathroom, locked the door behind her, and cleaned herself with trembling hands. Her reflection looked back at her with swollen eyes, a bruised cheek, and hair matted with blood. But she didn't cry. Her body was too numb. She washed her face, stitched her scalp with a safety pin and cotton wool, and wrapped a scarf tightly around her head. That night, as Uche snored in their room, Amaka lay on the cold bathroom floor, scribbling in her diary by flashlight. I am alive, but I am not living. If I die tomorrow, no one will notice, not even him. And if I must go, it won't be in this house, not at his hands. That diary entry marked the first line of her plan, not to escape the pain, but to reclaim the life they all told her to throw away. After that night, something inside Amaka changed. Not in a dramatic, movie-like fashion, no loud rebellion or angry confrontation, just a stillness that settled deep into her soul. She stopped speaking unless absolutely necessary. She no longer asked Uche questions, no longer explained her actions, no longer sought his approval. He would rant, and she would nod. He would insult, and she would walk away. At first, he enjoyed it, mistaking her silence for submission. He would grin and boast to his friends, I finally tamed her. She's now a real wife, quiet and obedient. But over time, her silence began to unnerve him. He would shout just to provoke her, but she wouldn't flinch. He once flung a plate against the wall, and she didn't blink. He accused her of sleeping with the tailor 2 streets away, but she didn't reply. So you're now ignoring me? He spat. Who gave you the guts? But Amaka would simply turn and walk into the room, her back straight, her eyes empty. She had become a wall, unreachable, unbothered, unreadable. Neighbors noticed the change too. The once lively woman who used to greet with a warm smile and carry plantains from the market, while humming quietly, now moved like a shadow. She didn't visit her parents anymore. Uche had forbidden it. Not that they called. The last time she reached out to her mother, the response was cold. You chose him, so carry your cross like a wife. Amaka didn't blame them anymore. She blamed herself, not for marrying Uche, but for staying as long as she did. But her silence wasn't weakness. It was armor. She was preserving what was left of her mind. She began sleeping with her diary under her pillow, writing letters she never sent, listing names of bus parks, nearby towns, numbers of old friends. It became her ritual, not just to survive, but to plan her escape down to the last thread. Her silence became her loudest scream, and though Uche didn't understand it, he could feel it. The way the air in the house had shifted, the way her eyes no longer pleaded for mercy. Then came the day Uche's cousin visited from another state. He came in and asked jokingly, What happened to your wife? She no day talk again. Uche laughed and said, I don't drain her voice. That's how to control a woman. The cousin looked at Amaka, seated quietly, face bruised but composed, and his smile faded. That evening, he slipped her a note under the door. If you ever need help, call this number. No one deserves this. Amaka read it, folded it, and tucked it into the inside hem of her wrapper. That night, she lay in bed, unmoving, as Uche snored beside her. She stared at the ceiling and whispered to herself, They broke me, yes. But I am still breathing. And as long as breath stays in my lungs, I will find the door they think they locked forever. The night Amaka escaped wasn't stormy or dramatic. It was quiet, almost too quiet. The kind of silence that comes before a soul chooses freedom over fear. Uche had come home drunk again, dropped his phone, undressed in the parlor, and collapsed on the couch. He didn't even acknowledge her presence. She had been waiting for this day. The small nylon bag was already packed, just 2 wrapper dresses, her diary, a worn pair of slippers, and the 7,000 Nigerian nairas Mummy Agnes had secretly given her after seeing her bruises. My daughter, the old woman whispered weeks before, don't wait till you leave this place in a coffin. When the night is right, go. Amaka stood in the corridor for a moment, listening to his snores, then turned the key in the back door. She didn't flinch when the lock clicked. She stepped out barefoot, feeling the earth under her feet like a new beginning. For the first time in years, the air felt different, like it wasn't trying to choke her. She walked for 20 minutes, until she reached the bus park. The bus to Enugu was loading. She gave a fake name to the conductor and paid for a seat in the back. As the bus pulled out of the station and the streetlights faded behind her, Amaka pressed her forehead to the window and wept silently. Not because of fear, not because of regret, but because she had done it, something no one believed she could do. The woman who once knelt before Uche and begged him to stop had now disappeared from his life without a trace. She didn't leave a note. She didn't tell her family. She didn't even pack her wedding ring. She left everything behind, like a woman burning the house she was buried alive in. And as the bus rumbled into the night, she closed her eyes and whispered to herself, "Whatever I meet ahead will not be worse than what I left behind." When Uche woke up the next morning, he called for her. No answer. He checked the kitchen. No food. Her wrappers were gone. Her phone left behind. He laughed at first. "She'll be back," he muttered. "Where can a woman like her go?" But when hours passed, his tone changed. He stormed around the compound, asking neighbors if they had seen her. Some shrugged. Others looked away. Mummy Agnes only said, "Maybe God remembered her." Uche, now pacing, shouted, "Let her go. She thinks she can survive without me? She will crawl back. Women like her always crawl back." But deep down, something in him twisted. Because this time, she didn't cry. She didn't fight. She simply vanished. And that terrified him more than any slap or scream ever could. The bus ride to Enugu was long and bumpy, but to Amaka, it felt like she was floating toward oxygen. She kept her face hidden with her scarf, watching the rising sun touch the dusty rooftops and the green farmlands blur by. When the bus finally stopped, she didn't step out immediately. Her feet trembled. Her hands were weak. For years, she had prayed for this moment, to be far from Uche, from the shame, the beatings, the voice that stripped her down every day. But now that freedom was real, she felt like a bird with broken wings, unsure of how to fly. A kind elderly woman at the park helped her find a place to stay, a small zinc-roofed room behind a canteen owned by one of her cousins. The cousin didn't ask too many questions. She just looked at Amaka's bruises and said, "You can stay here, but you'll need to find small work." Amaka nodded, grateful. She didn't want pity. She wanted purpose. Something to help her forget the woman she once was. The first job she got was at a local nursery school, nothing glamorous, but it was enough. Her salary barely covered rent and food, but the joy on the children's faces when she taught them how to spell apple gave her a strange kind of healing. In those small classrooms with colorful plastic chairs and broken chalkboards, Amaka began to remember who she was. She would wake up early, tie her scarf, walk 30 minutes to school, and stay behind after classes to mop the floor and prepare lessons. No one there knew her past. No one whispered when she walked by. No one cared that she didn't wear wedding rings or makeup or fancy clothes. In that obscurity, Amaka thrived. Every evening, she would sit on a small stool outside her window and write in her diary. She wrote about the silence in her new room, the children who hugged her, and the way she no longer jumped at loud noises. Slowly, the darkness in her spirit began to melt, not all at once, but like ice left under the sun. One Sunday after service, she stood in front of a mirror at a local boutique, staring at a dress that reminded her of who she used to be, soft lavender, long and simple. The salesgirl smiled and said, "Madam, this color fits you." Amaka smiled back, not the fake one she wore in her old marriage, but a real one, warm and free. As she paid for the dress, she told herself, "No man will ever define my worth again. I may not know what lies ahead, but I've already buried what tried to kill me." That evening, she wore the dress and took a long walk through the market square. The stairs didn't make her flinch. The dust didn't bother her. Her body still carried scars, but her soul had begun to bloom again, quietly, beautifully. She wasn't the same Amaka, who left with tears in her eyes. She was now a woman rebuilding from ashes, and this time she was building with her own hands. Back in the city, Uche had once roamed like a king. Life had turned sour. He told everyone Amaka ran off with another man. After all I did for her, he would shout in beer parlors. I fed her, clothed her. She was nothing when I met her. The men would nod, laugh, pat his back. But when the drinks ran out, they disappeared, and Uche was left with mounting debt, a collapsed business, and a growing bitterness that hardened into cruelty. That was when he met Stella. She was 10 years younger, fiercely beautiful, with legs like polished ebony and a tongue sharper than a blade. She was everything Amaka wasn't: loud, sassy, unapologetic. Uche was drawn to her like fire to fuel. He thought he could mold her into another silent wife. He saw her confidence and mistook it for inexperience. What he didn't realize was that Stella came with her own scars, and she had vowed never to let any man write her story for her. Their marriage was rushed. Within 5 months, Uche had moved Stella into his home. At first, everything was hot and sweet: passion, late-night laughter, wild sex, and matching clothes on Sundays. But underneath the glamour was chaos. Stella wasn't afraid of him. She didn't flinch when he shouted. She would yell right back, slam the door, and throw his food away if he insulted her. "I'm not Amaka," she screamed one evening. "I wasn't raised to kneel before a man who doesn't deserve it." Uche was stunned. No woman had ever spoken to him like that. When he raised his hand, Stella slapped him first. "Touch me and I'll scatter your head," she hissed. Their fights became legendary in the neighborhood. Plates shattered. Neighbors knocked. Police were called. But still Uche stayed. Not out of love, out of ego. He refused to believe he had lost control again. But the truth was glaring. He had married a mirror, and all he saw was a reflection of his own madness. Their marriage lasted just under 2 years. It ended one rainy night after Uche returned home drunk and accused Stella of sleeping with the dry cleaner. "He delivers your clothes too fast. Something must be going on," he shouted. Stella laughed in his face. "If I was cheating, you wouldn't even be the type I'd hide it from." That was the final blow. Uche lunged. Stella pushed him so hard he crashed into the door. She packed his clothes into a Ghana must-go bag and flung it into the rain. "Get out," she screamed. "You're not a man. You're a disgrace." The next morning, the whole neighborhood talked. "Second wife Don send him out oh. He no fit tame this one." Uche, soaking wet and humiliated, dragged his bag through muddy water. His ego shattered once again. He had tried to conquer another woman, and ended up defeated not by her fists, but by her refusal to bow. Uche moved into a friend's boys' quarters after the divorce. The room was small, with peeling paint, a broken fan, and a leaking ceiling, but it was the only place he could afford. His business had collapsed entirely. His savings were gone. Friends now ignored his calls. Women stopped smiling at him. And for the first time in his adult life, Uche had to look at his own reflection and see the monster staring back. But he didn't blame himself. No, he blamed Amaka, blamed Stella, blamed the economy. Everyone but himself. One evening, while lying on the hard foam mattress, he scrolled through social media and saw a video of Stella dancing at a party, surrounded by friends. She was glowing, happy, untouched. Uche slammed the phone down in rage. "These women think they can live without me," he shouted. "I made them." But deep down, the silence that followed whispered a different truth. They were better without him. And the world could see it. Still, Uche didn't stop there. He began spreading rumors again, this time about Stella. "She's sleeping around," he told anyone who would listen. "She was cheating all through our marriage. She's shameless." But this time, Stella fought back. She confronted him in public, right outside the local supermarket. "Say my name again, and I will slap you into 2027, she yelled. People gathered. Uche tried to play the victim, but no one was buying it anymore. His reputation was in tatters. He was known not as a man, but as the cautionary tale of what happens when pride becomes poison. He couldn't hold down a job, couldn't keep a woman, couldn't earn respect. But instead of changing, he festered. His bitterness turned into hatred, especially for Amaka. She started all this, he would mutter to himself. If only I had put her in her place early enough. He had no idea that the woman he once tore apart was not just surviving. She was about to return. One morning, as Uche sat shirtless on a wooden bench, drinking cheap liquor and complaining to another broken man, a convoy of black SUVs drove past slowly. Their engines hummed powerfully, their windows tinted. The street fell silent. Market women stopped. Children stared. The vehicles stopped by the new community center. And from the center SUV, a woman stepped out, tall, regal, glowing. She wore a cream gown, modest yet royal. Her head tie shimmered under the sun. Her face was calm, composed, unreadable. Uche's drink fell from his hand. "Amaka," he whispered, blinking in disbelief. It couldn't be. But it was. She didn't see him. Or maybe she did and chose not to. Either way, her silence pierced deeper than 1,000 slaps. And just like that, the man who once called her a whore, a disgrace, and a waste of space, now sat, forgotten, dirty, and drunk, watching her walk in power. The weeks that followed Amaka's arrival felt like a curse to Uche. Everywhere he turned, people whispered. At the corner bar, in the tailor shop, at the mechanic's junction. Her name was in every conversation, yet no one dared say it directly to him. He pretended not to care. He laughed loudly, drank more, and bragged that he once touched the woman now acting like royalty. But inside, he boiled with shame and fear. He couldn't accept that the woman he once dragged by the wrapper, called names in the market, and accused of adultery, had risen above him. Worse still, rumors began to swirl that she was married to someone high up, a man with power. Uche didn't know the details, and that uncertainty tortured him. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Amaka walking past in her flowing gown, surrounded by uniformed guards and polished cars. The memory bruised him harder than any slap Stella ever gave him. Instead of finding peace, Uche became consumed by the need to destroy her image. One Sunday afternoon, surrounded by idle men and loud music, he stood up in the middle of the beer joint and yelled, "Let me tell Una the truth. That woman Una day hail up and down. She be a shawo. Big one. Na me talk am." A few people gasped, others stared in confusion. She run comet say she day suffer, but na lie. She day open leg, give big men for money. That's why she day shine now. That convoy? Na lie. Na her latest customer. The men laughed awkwardly, some recording him with their phones. "Me way know her. I sleep with am any time I want. She day beg me, make I no leave am. Now she day pretend like say she holy. Tufiakwa." His voice echoed across the street. The crowd had grown larger now, and someone in the back had already started uploading the video to Facebook. Even the bar owner looked uncomfortable, but no one stopped him. Uche, in his drunken ego, had no idea that every word was sealing his fate. Amaka was not present, but the insult sliced through the community like a machete through silk. Within 24 hours, the video had gone viral, not because of what Uche said, but because of who the woman was. People began to connect the dots. The elegant woman who stepped out of the black SUV, the hush of security detail, the drivers in matching uniforms, the silence she carried like a crown. She was no ordinary woman. She was Her Excellency Amaka, MBA, the wife of Governor Ifani, MBA, the most feared and respected man in the state. And now, a drunken man with a filthy past had called her a prostitute in public. The palace didn't release a statement. Amaka didn't respond. But the silence was not weakness. It was the calm before a storm. Uche's laughter still rang out across the street that night, but by morning, he would wake up in handcuffs. The morning after the outburst, Uche woke up on a threadbare mat with a pounding headache and the stale taste of alcohol in his mouth. The bar owner had thrown him out the night before, muttering something about bringing police, walla. Uche ignored the rising buzz outside. He was used to noise. But this time, it wasn't the usual market chaos. It was silence. A heavy, watching silence. Before he could gather himself, there was a loud knock on the door, followed by the gruff voice of authority. Open this door now. Uche staggered toward it, thinking it was a landlord or neighbor. But when he opened it, 6 stern-looking policemen stood in formation, hands on batons, one holding a document. Mr. Uche Emmanuel, you are under arrest for defamation, public harassment, and criminal slander against Her Excellency Amaka, MBA. The words felt like thunder in his chest. Who? What? I didn't, he stammered. But the officers didn't wait. They grabbed him, handcuffed him, and dragged him into the street as the neighbors peeked from their windows. The entire community gathered as the once proud man was paraded in shame. Phones were out. Children pointed. Some neighbors jeered. A shallow talker, one woman shouted. See your mouth now, another added. Uche struggled, swearing and threatening. I go deal with Una. I go soona too. But nobody listened. At the station, his protests fell on deaf ears. The video had already reached the governor's office. Lawyers were waiting. A full report had been compiled, including past police reports from his second marriage, testimonies from neighbors, and audio evidence Stella secretly recorded during their abusive fights. For the first time, Uche was not in control. His words, the same weapon he had always used to break women, were now being used as chains. No bail was offered. The case had the attention of the entire state. Newspapers picked up the story. Ex-husband of governor's wife arrested for slander. Some online blogs even titled it, The Fool Who Mocked Power. Back at the government house, Amaka remained silent. She didn't laugh. She didn't gloat. She simply sat beside her husband, eyes fixed on the garden outside the window. He has been arrested, her husband said gently. We're going after everything he owns. She nodded once. That was all. There was no satisfaction in watching someone fall, especially someone who had once shared her roof, her meals, her bed. But this wasn't revenge. This was justice. A quiet reckoning. Uche had expected a fight, a scream, a public exchange. Instead, he got silence. Deadly silence that moved through legal systems, froze bank accounts, issued property seizures, and buried him without a word from her lips. The streets would remember this day, not as the day Uche insulted a woman, but as the day his insults brought him down. Uche sat in the corner of the cold cell, his shirt drenched in sweat, his pride ripped apart. His cellmate, a quiet man accused of petty theft, asked no questions. Uche had not eaten in 2 days. The guards treated him with a cold professionalism, but every now and then one would smirk or murmur, "So now you insult, madam." At the police headquarters, the pressure was mounting. The governor, known for his fierce protection of family and zero tolerance for public scandal, had given only one instruction: let the law handle it. But let it be complete. Lawyers working on behalf of the First Lady filed civil and criminal suits. A cease and desist letter was made public, not to defend Amaka's honor, but to set an example. Her name was no longer just her own. It was part of the office of the First Lady, and it could not be dragged through the mud by a failed ex-husband with nothing to lose. The media frenzy grew. Photos of Uche being dragged into the courtroom made front pages. His old neighbors gave interviews. He was always shouting. We knew he would end up like this. Videos surfaced of his drunken rants. Even Stella, his second wife, filed an affidavit detailing the abuse she endured, adding fuel to an already blazing case. And still, Amaka said nothing. She didn't grant interviews, didn't tweet, didn't post a cryptic Bible verse on social media. She simply lived, attended events, signed women empowerment bills, and let the system speak for her. That silence, sharp, dignified, immovable, cut deeper than any clapback. While Uche rotted in custody, begging for anyone to speak for him, Amaka stayed silent, unshaken. No public drama, no messy headlines, just quiet, thorough consequences. His properties were seized. His former apartment was repossessed by the bank due to unpaid loans. His shop, once his pride, was sealed and auctioned to pay damages. He had no lawyer of his own. His friends had vanished. Even his family, once loud defenders of his masculinity, began to panic quietly behind closed doors. His mother went to the government house gate and cried, But the security detail wouldn't let her through. "You need an appointment," one said. "She's not seeing visitors." She cried louder, pleading for her son. But no one came out. Not even Amaka. It was then that the realization hit them. She was no longer the girl they could insult, beg, or manipulate. She was untouchable now. And Uche, the man who once stood over her with his fists, now knelt behind bars, forgotten by the world and erased from power. Uche sat in the courtroom, his hands trembling as the guards removed his handcuffs. For the first time in years, he looked small. The man who once strutted through the streets, barking orders at neighbors and cursing women in the open, now sat hunched in a faded shirt that hung loose over his shoulders. His lawyer, a public defender, whispered hurriedly in his ear, but Uche wasn't listening. His mind was still stuck in the cold cell, in the echo of metal doors slamming, in the memory of his mother crying at the gate like a beggar. The court was packed. Reporters lined the back, neighbors whispered in the gallery, and representatives from the governor's legal team sat in dignified silence. Amaka wasn't there. She didn't need to be. Her presence lived in every document, every testimony, every cold, clear fact. The charges read like poetry to the brokenhearted: defamation, public slander, emotional abuse, domestic violence, intent to harm reputation, threat to public image of a state official. Uche swallowed the air like it was poison. The prosecution opened with chilling precision. Video clips from his past were played without pause. Uche screaming in the street, tearing a Amaka's wrapper during an argument, calling her names. Witnesses were called. First was a neighbor, an elderly woman who had once tried to intervene when Uche was beating Amaka. "I held his hand and he pushed me," she said, eyes burning. He said she was his wife and he could do whatever he wanted. Then came a former landlord, who testified how Uche accused him of sleeping with Amaka just because the man warned him to lower his voice. "He threatened to break my legs," the landlord said. The courtroom gasped. Then came the clinic nurse, the one who treated Amaka's bleeding face years ago. She had kept the file. She read the entry: bruised left eye, split lip, possible cracked rib. Patient claims to have fallen, but showed signs of fear. The judge leaned back in his seat, face stern, as if the air had grown heavier. But the final blow came when Stella walked in, Uche's second wife. She looked composed, dressed in a simple suit, and carried a small file. "He hit me too," she said without emotion. "But unlike Amaka, I hit back." She narrated stories that made the gallery groan, of nights he locked her out, of mornings she found strange panties in their bedroom, of how he slapped her in front of their pastor and lied that she insulted him. "He thinks women are made to kneel and be slapped," she said. "He told me once that Amaka deserved everything he did to her, that no woman should raise her head unless her husband permits it." Her words didn't just condemn him, they buried him. The courtroom fell silent as the prosecution rested. Uche sat frozen. The walls had finally closed in, and they were lined with every cruelty he once thought would never come back to haunt him. The verdict came quicker than expected. The judge, a man known for his calm but piercing sense of justice, didn't mince words. "You, Uche Emmanuel, have shown a pattern of cruelty masked as masculinity. You have humiliated, assaulted, and endangered women under the guise of marriage. You have brought shame to yourself, your family, and now this state." The sentence: 7 years in prison, with no option for fine. As the words echoed across the room, Uche's shoulders collapsed like a broken wall. The gavel slammed down, and the courtroom buzzed with murmurs. Some clapped quietly, others sighed. Uche didn't cry. His tears had dried long ago, replaced with the disbelief of a man who thought he would never fall. As the guards grabbed him, he looked back one last time, but there was no one there for him. His friends had deserted him. His family was locked outside. Even the journalists had moved on to other stories. He was alone. The days that followed in prison were not kind. Uche quickly realized that inside those walls, pride was worthless. The guards didn't care who he used to be. The inmates didn't respect his former glory. They only knew what they had seen on the news: a wife-beater who insulted the governor's wife and got caught. He was mocked, spit on, assigned to the lowest duties: cleaning toilets, scrubbing walls, mopping hallways. His hands grew rough. His knees ached. At night, he lay on a thin mattress and stared at the ceiling, haunted by flashbacks of Amaka's face, the look she wore when he slapped her, when he dragged her by the arm, when she bled and he laughed. He remembered all of it now, but it was too late. In those moments, regret was a cruel visitor. He sometimes screamed in his sleep. Other times, he sat awake all night, whispering apologies to no one. His silence was his only companion. Back in the city, his mother made every attempt to contact Amaka. She visited the government house, went to the church Amaka sometimes attended, even bribed a cleaner to sneak a letter to her room. But none of it worked. Amaka didn't even acknowledge the efforts. She had moved on, not out of pride, but peace. Uche's mother wailed. "He is my only son," she cried. "Forgive him, I beg you." But the guards were firm. "There's no appointment. There's no message to deliver." His sisters tried calling journalists, hoping to create sympathy. But the public didn't care anymore. They remembered the videos. They remembered the blood. They remembered the woman who had vanished and returned untouchable. No one felt pity for Uche. The shame he used to crush others had now become his own nameplate. And Amaka? She had no need to speak, because her silence had already spoken louder than Uche's entire life. It had been nearly 2 months since the sentencing, when Amaka's mother knocked on her front door. Dressed in a simple wrapper, her face lined with guilt and time, she stood there quietly until the maid let her in. Amaka was in the garden, seated beneath a mango tree, watching the sun melt through the leaves. Her mother approached slowly, unsure of what to say. For years, she had told Amaka to endure. "Marriage is not easy," she used to say. "Men are men." She had urged her to go back, to keep the peace, to pray harder. She had silenced her cries, ignored her bruises, and told her to remember her vows. And now, the same daughter stood in elegant silence, clothed in dignity and power, while the man who almost destroyed her was caged like a rabid dog. The old woman fell to her knees and wept. "I'm sorry, my daughter. I should have protected you. I failed you." Amaka rose slowly and sat beside her mother, her voice soft but firm. "We were all victims, Mama. Not just me. You too were taught to endure pain and call it love." Her mother sobbed louder, clutching her hands. "You begged for peace while I bled. You told me to kneel while he stepped on me. But I forgive you." The words weren't easy, but they came from a place of deep healing. Amaka had grown into a woman who didn't need to raise her voice to be heard. Her pain had made her wiser, not bitter. She wiped her mother's tears and held her tightly. For the first time in years, they wept together, not in defeat, but in release. Her mother had aged, but Amaka saw through the wrinkles and into the heart of a woman who had only wanted her daughter to survive, even if it meant sacrificing joy. That day, under the mango tree, a broken bond was mended with quiet forgiveness. Later that evening, Amaka sat alone with her journal. She flipped through pages filled with tears, prayers, doubts, and anger. Pages where she had begged God for a way out, for justice, for peace. She found the entry where she wrote, "One day, I'll breathe freely again, even if no one believes me." She smiled faintly and wrote a new line. "Today, I didn't need anyone to believe me." The truth stood on its own. She closed the book and walked to the window, staring into the city lights. Somewhere behind bars, Uche now knew the weight of his words. Somewhere in her old neighborhood, girls walked past the very street where she was once disgraced. But now they saw something different, a woman who was not just a survivor, but a symbol. Amaka didn't need revenge. She only needed to rise. And rise she did, with silence, scars, and the strength they never expected. The final hearing took place under an overcast sky, as if the heavens themselves mourned the long road that led there. Uche stood once again in the defendant's dock, but he was no longer the defiant man who once mocked women with pride. His hair had grown uneven, his face thinned by months in detention. He looked like a ghost of himself, haunted, hollow, humiliated. The judge, stern as ever, asked him if he had any final words before sentencing. Uche stepped forward with trembling hands and said nothing at first. Then, in a weak voice, he muttered, I have hurt many people. I was blind with pride. I thought I was a man, but I was a monster." The courtroom remained still. No gasps. No pity. Just silence. The victims had already heard enough. The truth was clear. Apologies, even now, were too late. The prosecutor shook his head in disgust. The judge delivered the final sentence. 7 years in prison without parole, with additional penalties of property seizure, a lifelong domestic abuse restriction, and community service after release. It wasn't just about Amaka anymore. It was about justice for every woman Uche had broken with his fists, his tongue, and his pride. Court officers escorted him out. He looked around one last time, hoping, perhaps, to see someone who remembered him fondly. But the gallery was filled with strangers. Even his mother had stopped coming. She had tried, pleaded, cried, but Amaka's silence had shut every door she knocked on. No one fought for Uche. His world had burned, and no one carried water for him. The press didn't even bother following him anymore. His story had become a cautionary tale, a fading echo of a man who destroyed his own life with hate. Outside the courtroom, people whispered as the prison van drove off. They didn't speak of pity or prayers. They spoke of karma, of justice served raw, of how once upon a time a man beat his wife in public and called her a whore, not knowing she would become untouchable. The streets remembered. Old neighbors remembered. Even the children who once watched Amaka crawl with bruises on her knees now spoke of her with pride. She had never returned to shout. She had never posted pictures or given interviews. But her silence crushed more than 1,000 press conferences could. The woman who was once dragged by her wrapper through the mud now rode past quietly in a black SUV. And the man who once said she would amount to nothing now wore the prison number across his chest. Uche was not just punished. He was erased. The sun rose gently over the governor's mansion, casting golden light across the balcony where Amaka stood, her hands wrapped around a warm mug of tea. She looked nothing like the broken girl who once begged God for strength and silence. She was calm now, not because life had been kind, but because she had survived when the world gave her every reason not to. She didn't need diamonds or titles to feel powerful. Her strength was the scars no one saw, the years of insults, beatings, rejection, shame, and abandonment. She remembered it all. She had once believed that love meant endurance, that being a good wife meant accepting pain, that her silence would bring peace. But now she knew survival wasn't weakness. It was war, and she had won, not with vengeance, but with grace. The governor stepped out quietly, wrapping his arms around her from behind. He didn't speak much about Uche. He never needed to. He had only done what any loving man would do, defend the woman he loved. But he also knew this victory belonged solely to Amaka. It was her story, her survival, her triumph. They didn't host any celebration. There were no media statements. Instead, Amaka visited her old neighborhood quietly a week later. Dressed simply, she stood near the same mango tree where she once sat bleeding. No guards. No photographers. Just her, a woman reborn. She handed the school bursar a silent envelope, enough to sponsor 10 girls through education. One of the girls asked, "Auntie, why are you helping us?" Amaka smiled and whispered, "Because someone once told me I was useless. I want you to know you're not." Back home, she opened her old diary, the same one she once wrote in with blood-stained fingers. She read the first line again. "Today he called me a whore, but I will not let that word define me." On the last page, she wrote just one sentence. "He called me a whore, but I became a queen." Then she closed it, stood up, and faced the future. There would be no revenge tour, no bitterness, just peace, loud in its silence, firm in its presence. Amaka no longer needed closure. Uche's screams had become echoes trapped in prison walls, but her healing had become a song the world would never forget. She was no longer just the woman he insulted. She was the woman he called a whore, and in that insult, she found the strength to become more than he ever deserved. Thank you for watching this video. What did you learn from this story? Drop it in the comments. Please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel Tochi Stories for more.